Hi witches, happy Friday. I hope you are all enjoying the new moon this evening. Be sure to check out Wednesday's video for more about how to celebrate the new moon if you haven't already seen it. And patrons, be sure you join me tonight at 8 p.m. live for tonight's new moon ritual. I am so excited to do this fire spell with you. It's going to be awesome. It is the new moon in Aries. So if you have more questions, I have a video about it and I hope to see you then. Today, however, we're going to be discussing a little bit of a different topic, and that topic is the Fae. So I did do a video about this last year. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth and to talk a little bit more about how you can start to incorporate the Fae into your practice if you so choose. And there is a lot of very contradicting information out there, I think, but I really think that each witch should approach the Fae on their own terms. I also think it's really good to be talking about the Fae, especially as we are approaching Beltane. So Beltane is a holiday on the Wheel of the Year, which is celebrated on May 1st. It is directly opposite to Samhain, which is Halloween, on the wheel, and it's regarded as a time in which the veil between our world and the world of the Fae is thin. This is similar to how during Samhain it is believed that the veil between our world and the world of the dead is thin, which is why we do a lot more ancestor work, veneration of those who have passed in the year prior. But in Beltane, it is really a celebration of summer. Weather around Beltane is usually pretty warm. We have kind of gotten out of the dreary days of March and April by then, hopefully. But with the warming of the world and as we approach summer later on in a couple weeks here, we'll start to see the energy of the earth being more active, and therefore the Fae being a little bit more active, as well as the veil between our world and theirs is thinner, so therefore they can cross over a little bit easier. There are tons of regional tales about mischievous humanoid spirits, and each culture has its very own rich folklore. So if you are interested in perhaps combining some of this with some ancestor work, maybe consider learning some fairy stories that originate from your family's country of origin, area of origin. So again, there are tons of really beautiful, very elaborate stories that are all very, can be very regionally specific. So if you are struggling to connect, or you're just curious about some of the stories maybe on the land that you're living on, or perhaps from the land that your family comes from, I think this is a really great avenue of researching some of that and learning a little bit more about your own ancestors and stuff like that. So I know a lot of witches are very interested in ancestor work, and we tend to do it a little bit more around Samhain when we are working with spirits of the dead and venerating those ancestors, but it's also something that we can do year-round. Water is coming off because I have lots of things to say and it was restricting my motion. So generally speaking, when we think about fairies, we kind of automatically go to the more common Celtic view of what fairies are. So you might think of pixies or banshees, brownies, goblins, all sorts of things like that. Elves, perhaps. But there are these kind of humanoid, otherworldly creatures that, are not human beings and sometimes have some very mysterious powers. Generally speaking, they are very mischievous, and a recurring kind of theme with fairies and fairy tales is this need for human beings to ward them away. And this kind of is very pervasive in witchcraft as well. I think this sentiment has definitely been passed down through generations and is still prevalent in witchcraft. There are some witches, I should say, who prefer not to work with the Fae at all, and you by no means have to, but there are some witches who kind of embrace some of that mischievousness and are comfortable kind of working with them similarly to how one would work with a deity, however different because they are different entities in and of themselves. So I'll get into that in just a second. Prior to that, a lot of ancient people spent not a great majority of their lives, but spent time trying to ward away fairies. They were seen to bring particular sicknesses or lead travelers astray when they are on these long journeys. They didn't have Google Maps, but they did know not to follow a will-o'-the-wisp into the woods. That is a very hard word to say. Now, not all fairies are necessarily bad. However, they are generally accepted to be a little bit mischievous. Now, there are lots of classifications of the Fae. You might run into some house spirits or some nature spirits, those who dwell out in the wilderness. But in Scottish folklore, and this is something that we see very commonly referenced when it comes to talking about the Fae, sometimes fairies are divided into two different types of courts. So you have the Seelie court, and these are Fae that are more beneficially inclined, however, don't take that for meaning that they are not dangerous or mischievous or might have other motives. While on the other hand, the Unseelie court were more often seen as bringing harm directly to humans. Now, again, both of them could be dangerous if humans do offend them, and neither court is necessarily like good or evil. That's kind of an oversimplification. But the main takeaway from all of that is no matter what type of fae that you are working with, that you are connecting with, all of them need and require respect, similar to that you would show a deity, an entity of any kind. Because we see them as cute little humanoid figures does not mean that they are necessarily completely benevolent, and again, should be treated with respect. So because fairy tales generally are very regional in terms of origin, there are different explanations as to who the fae truly are. So being a Celtic pagan, well, I'm technically an eclectic pagan, but as someone who works with the Morrigan, a Celtic Irish deity, it is said that the Fae actually are a race of people who lived in Ireland before human beings, essentially. Actually, after a series of battles, they were forced underground under the Sidhe, or fairy mounds, which is where we get the banshee, and often lived on as like fairies from that point on, right? It's coming down to these kind of supernatural beings who live in a different realm. Now, as witches, we do have access to interacting with this realm. While the Fae most often live in the other world, there are times on Earth where they can more easily spill over into our reality and maybe cause some trouble. There are two ways that witches tend to approach this, either protecting themselves from the Fae like their ancestors did, or creating some space for the Fae. Now, I've always kind of personally feared working with the Fae. Like, it's always seemed very, chaotic, and like something that I just was like, I already have enough chaos in my life, like not trying to do that. And I've tried to really protect myself from them, which is kind of crazy because I work with the Morrigan, who is very much associated with Fae. The Fae, I should say. She's sometimes called the fairy woman and is very much associated with that figure of the banshee, which is why I keep talking about it. She's a very important goddess to me, so I talk about her a lot, sorry. But this year, I am kind of changing that up. I want to expand my practice a little bit, and I'm dedicating one of the window boxes that I have to be sort of like an altar or a common ground for myself and the Fae, where I'm not going to be asking them for anything. I'm just going to spend a year or a summer, a season, whatever it is, giving them offerings and inviting them into that specific space. Now, I only want to show them respect. I'm not, again, asking them for anything. As with approaching any sort of new interaction with an entity, I want to give enough time for that trust and that respect to be built, because I think that is incredibly important when it comes to working with new spirits or introducing a new avenue of working into your practice. So I'm not really inviting them into my space necessarily. I will keep my protections up around my house. However, for now, at least, I'm going to be doing that. It might change as my practice evolves, but as of right now, I just am like kind of setting up a space for them to show them honor and respect and to try to like get back in touch with the land. That's been like a big theme for me recently. So if you are looking to work with the Fae, the first thing I recommend doing is going to your local library and picking up some books on folklore. Like, they can be academic texts, anything that you can find about folklore. It's just good to familiarize yourself with the stories and understand how these Fae interact with human beings in those stories, because I think that really reveals a lot about the nature of fairies, Fae. The Fae are pretty tricksy by nature, and I feel like we can learn a lot from past recounts of what is considered myth in order to inform our present actions when encountering the Fae. As with all things, working with the Fae takes time and patience to build that relationship with them as you would a deity. So don't be discouraged at first, and also I don't recommend just jumping in and like asking for stuff. Definitely setting up that kind of prior sign of respect, I guess, by like leaving offerings and stuff like that. Interacting with them in a careful manner can start to build that relationship for you, so you can then create kind of this symbiotic relationship between yourself and these otherworldly creatures. Now, as someone who lives in a more urban area, it can be really hard to kind of connect with the Fae in a way that feels like very deep and very connected, if that makes sense. So I tend to go out into the woods to kind of like slow down. I am lucky that I just have to take a drive. Slowing down and getting used to the energies that surround you, and anything that seems odd or perhaps out of place can be a sign of something else encroaching. Whether or not that is good or bad is kind of up to the entity, I suppose. Some common signs that Fae are around. The first one, if you hear kind of laughing or kind of this really beautiful music. At my last house, I swear, my mom's garden was definitely a place where the Fae were, because whenever I was working out there, I'd always feel like I heard laughter behind me, and I truly believe, like, I am very convinced that the Fae were there working with me in my garden and just around me at some point. Speaking of gardens, if you suddenly come upon a ring of mushrooms, that is also called a fairy ring. Now, I would not approach that. That is often seen as kind of not something that humans should go near. A very common legend is that if you step into a fairy circle, you will be forced to dance and cavort until you either go insane or die, which is like a lot. Can you see why I did not want to work with the Fae for a very long time? However, this can be a sign that they are near if you are trying to appease them, maybe setting up an altar nearby where you saw some of the fairy rings, or if you have any like weird new plants or like spurts of mushrooms that are just growing all of a sudden without you like planting them, that can also be a sign that the Fae are nearby. Another very common thing that people see, especially when it comes to recognizing house spirits or brownies or perhaps a boggart who is, or a boggart, can't say that right, sorry. If a shiny object goes missing and then suddenly reappears like where it could not have like logically been, if that makes sense. So like if you lose like an earring or a necklace and all of a sudden you're like looking for it and it appears like halfway across the house, you have no idea how it got there, you know you didn't touch it. It could be a sign of the Fae, it could be the sign of another mischievous spirit in the house, regardless of what it is. I definitely recommend like looking into it at least. So yes, you should be able to connect with the Fae a little bit easier during Beltane if that is something that you so choose. Now, how does one begin to work with the Fae? I know that's probably the question on everybody's lips, right? You are not going to necessarily work with the Fae in the way you would with a deity, in my personal opinion. I feel like there are greater things that deities can kind of have domain over versus the Fae. Generally, I recommend just leaving offerings for them and showing them a sign of respect as definitely your first step, but in general, like that might be as far as I get in terms of working with them, just showing honor to them, honor to the land, so on and so forth. However, you can occasionally petition them to help you with certain tasks. Now, the number one thing, super big sign of disrespect is asking their names, so please do not ask their names. Also, try not to give them your name, or try to avoid the question when at all possible, because there are definitely some Fae out there who can really cause some chaos and wreak some havoc if they have your name, according to local legends. The Fae are also very much associated with nature and don't particularly like inorganic stuff. So if you are going to be giving them offerings, consider natural things like fruits and vegetables, plants, seeds, flowers, any sort of aromatic herb is a go-to. You could hang some wind chimes because they like the sound of chimes. You can offer them shiny objects such as jewelry or maybe coins, which I know is technically inorganic, but something along those lines, something shiny, maybe something that you find out in nature that is super shiny. I found, oh my gosh, I found this huge thing of like quartz just like on the ground the other day, and it was amazing. So something like that I would probably like offer to the Fae. Some witches like to give them moon water. Some witches like to bake things and offer them to the Fae. However, according to some legends, like that's not super great and can actually ward away the Fae. So depending on the tradition you are working in, there might be different rules. But in general, things that are really associated with nature, things that come from nature, you know, twigs, seashells, stones, stuff like that. But also you can give non-physical offerings. So things like dancing or singing, you know, singing to them or maybe writing a poem to them. So in that way, I feel like the interactions between human and Fae can be very similar to how one would approach deity work. I just feel like it's less of a worship work relationship. Does that make sense? So if you are interested in working with the Fae, my biggest like number one recommendation beyond doing your research and knowing what you're getting yourself into, because it is not like a joke. It is not just something that you casually do. It does take a lot of work, just as anything in witchcraft really does, and it does take a lot of practice. So my biggest recommendation, if you are interested in learning this beyond researching, consider just setting up a small space for the Fae in your garden or wherever you have some of your more green stuff. I plan on making a fairy garden. I'm very excited about that. I want to like sculpt things myself, maybe, like possibly, and really just set up something that I think would look nice and is inviting to the Fae, just to show them respect and to be like, hello, I see you and I appreciate the things that you are doing. I don't necessarily want you in the house, so I'm keeping iron like in all of my corners per usual. Regardless of that, Hearn and the Morrigan have asked me to kind of start to invite that energy, kind of that whimsical and kind of mischievous, maybe a little bit chaotic energy into my space a little bit more, to work on my issues with spontaneity. No, but it's just something that I am very interested in and something that I plan on documenting. So if you do work with the Fae, I would love to hear about your practice. I, at this point, do not consider myself like working with the Fae. I'm only honoring them and kind of showing them respect. I'm not asking for anything in return. And again, I don't recommend doing that until further down the line when you have an established relationship with them. But I hope to document some of that. I would love to hear from other practitioners, especially like Celtic practitioners, considering I work with the Morrigan and also like the horned god, basically. So I would love to hear from you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed the new moon. Thank you so much for watching my video. I'll see you guys later. Bye.